First Person is produced in cooperation with the Far East Broadcasting Company, who rejoice in the stories of changed lives through the power of Jesus Christ. Learn more at FEBC.org.
God has, in our lives, Wayne, opened some unbelievable doors we could not have ever sought out ourselves. When we leave the choice to God, He gives His best to us. Be patient and see what God does with you.
Join us now for First Person, a weekly conversation with people who are making a difference in the kingdom of God for His glory. You're going to meet longtime Christian broadcaster and leader Wayne Pederson on this edition of First Person. Welcome, I'm Wayne Shepherd. We'll start the interview momentarily, but first I'll remind you that these programs are all archived online at firstpersoninterview.com for your listening convenience. You can also subscribe to our podcast edition on Apple, Google, Spotify, Buzzsprout, and many other places where podcasts can be heard. And don't forget to download our free smartphone app called First Person Interview from your app store to download and listen to programs. Our guest, Wayne Pederson, began his life on a dairy farm in northern Minnesota, but his voice and many times his body have traveled the world as he has served God in many radio and mission ministries. You'll get to know this man's heart as you listen. As we began our online conversation, I asked Wayne if there was any way of counting how many hours he spent on the radio.
Well, Wayne, that's a great question. I think I'd be second only to you, my friend,
I don't know about
time
that.
spent behind a microphone. But as one that's worked in radio, both on the on-air part and the management side, really live local radio is still my first love, being behind the microphone and interacting with our listeners.
Mm-hmm. You recently wrote your memoir, and I knew a lot about your life. We've been friends for many years, but there were many things I didn't know. I didn't really understand that you grew up on the farm physically. I mean, you were the kid doing the chores day in and day out on that dairy farm. I didn't know that.
Yeah, this was in northern Minnesota where it gets really, really cold in the winter. We had a dairy farm, and the cows have to be milked twice a day, 365 days a year. In the summer, you're doing the crops and the hay. And so, as I said, I produced a lot of radio programs on the seat of a farm-all tractor and pushing different buttons, pretending I was on the radio. And I was probably, 14 years old at that time. So even way back then, God placed radio in my mind and heart.
Yeah. Have you ever figured out why? I mean, of course, we won't know until that day in heaven, but I mean, that God put that seed there so long ago. That's amazing.
Well, our family listened to radio all the time in the house, even before television. I'm that old. And we had radio in the barn when we milked the cows, and we're very close to that local radio station. And we knew the on-air people. But I think part of it is just the DNA God places in us with a desire for, a passion for, an ability for something. And so it was always there from a very, very young age. I wanted to be a DJ. I wanted to be on the radio, never, ever imagining where that would lead.
Well, it didn't take long for it to lead directly into radio, did it?
Well, that's right. I in Minneapolis at the University of Minnesota, I started part-time and soon became full-time at KTIS in Minneapolis, Northwestern College Radio, now University of Northwestern.
We're being heard on that station now.
We played a lot of Moody programs, with Stories of Great Christians and Bill Pierce and Dick Anthony and Moody Presents and all those great programs. So there was always a strong relationship between Northwestern Radio and Moody Radio. And Wayne, that's where we made our connection a long time ago. We were contemporaries and mainly on the air in those days.
Mm-hmm. Actually, I have a photo. You've seen the photo of the two of us at Amsterdam 83, where you represented Northwestern College Radio and I represented Moody Bible Institute Radio, and we co-anchored those broadcasts from Amsterdam, which is, I look back on it and I think, well, that was a fairly important undertaking. That was pre-digital, of course, so we had to haul tape machines over there and figure out some sort of way of, I don't even know how we did it, getting our programming back to North America, but we did it, huh?
That was very formative. We had our team going out and doing coverage. There were about 4,000 evangelists from around the world reaching unreached people groups. And Billy Graham gathered these itinerant evangelists to give them the tools and the training and the passion and the prayer and the motivation to keep at it. So we had the privilege of meeting these evangelists from 200 countries around the world. And you and I had the privilege each night of doing the wrap and sending it back to North America via satellite. We sent it over the pond.
I don't even remember. It had to be satellite, I guess.
So it was, we were 6 hours ahead of North America, so we could feed it that afternoon. It was ready to run that morning on hundreds of radio stations across North America. And we were dubbed the Wayne and Wayne Show back in those days by our team. Yeah. But not only was that a great introduction to national and global radio, it planted in my heart a love for evangelism and missions, and which would later bear fruit in some of the career choices God led me to meet these evangelists that had so little except a passion and a drive to share Jesus with those that had never heard the message. And that experience was very, very shaping in my own life and ministry, and I know it's yours too.
Well, that's just one of the many experiences that God has given you that shaped you, as you said. And we won't trace every step of your Christian radio ministry career, Wayne, but it has been substantial. But as you look back on everything, start to talk to me about some of the thoughts you have. And you're not done yet. Is it Al Sanders who said, someone asked him, have you spent your whole life in radio? And he said, not yet.
Well, after, 55 years in radio, I'm still dabbling in it. As you know, I have the privilege of working with Ed Cannon at Far East Broadcasting, a wonderful global ministry that is reaching people that would not be reached except for radio, streaming, podcasting, digital broadcasting, and getting phenomenal response from places you would not imagine, places that are less than 1% Christian. And I'm thinking even now of Ukraine. They have half a dozen stations in Ukraine, and with all the violence and terror and poverty, and it's a disaster. FEBC has 6 outstanding. Maybe it's more than that, but because some of the stations have been bombed off the air, unfortunately. But to have the privilege of broadcasting into China, Indonesia, Vietnam, Ukraine, Russia is a high privilege. So I appreciate being involved in that. Also, I do some consulting for some other radio stations, and I've been on the board of National Religious Broadcasters since a long, long time back. And so, I'm officially retired, but at this stage, it's a new season. I'm not running a large organization anymore, but having an opportunity to influence ministries, organizations, and individuals that are serving in God's service.
That's an important part of this whole thing, the word influence, because I know you feel this, that at this stage of life, it is being an influencer that's our most important role. You feel that, don't you?
Oh, very much. I summarize our careers with, first of all, you're a worker. You're doing all the work. You're reading the news, reading the weather, turning on the transmitter, and spinning the records. And then you move into management, where you're doing that work through others that are qualified to be on the air. And from management into leadership, where you're not managing so much by setting the direction, creating a good culture. And after that comes the season I'm in now, where influence. I'm not running a large organization, but have opportunities God is opening. When you're our age, people come to you and say, hey, give me some advice. I'm thinking about this, or what do you think about this idea? And we have an opportunity through the consulting that we do and the boards that we serve on to shape ministries and influence individuals serving in those ministries. And that's very gratifying.
Yes. I became aware of this message largely because of a message you gave in your local church, which was posted online, Wayne, and I watched that message a couple of times, actually, because it meant so much to me. And by the way, our listeners can translate what we're talking about into their own life and career. We've been in radio. Other listeners may have obviously been doing other things with their life, but these stages are what's important, and they translate well. But in that message you gave in your own local church, you cited a couple of biblical passages that I want to share with our listeners today, if you don't mind. The first was in Philippians chapter 3, beginning at verse 12. Do you have that in front of you there, Wayne?
I do. I have it right in front of me here.
Read it for us.
Okay, sure will. This is Philippians 3, 12 through 14. Paul, towards the end of his ministry career, says, I don't mean to say I've already achieved these things or have already reached perfection, but I press on to possess that perfection for which Christ Jesus first possessed me. Another word for perfection a better word would be completion, because we'll never be perfect, but we can complete the works that Jesus has called us to do. No, dear brothers and sisters, I've not achieved it, but I focus on one thing: forgetting the past and looking forward to what lies ahead, I press on to reach the end of the race and receive the heavenly prize for which God, through Christ Jesus, is calling us. That really sums up what each of us that serve the Lord should strive to be in this fourth quarter of our lives.
It does. Your theme is finish strong, finish well.
That's right. And I've been working with a good friend, Ken Larson, who's the head of Slumberland stores across the country. We've been on this theme of finish strong, finish well. I've been a Minnesota Vikings fan for many years, and they had the reputation for a long time of losing games in the fourth quarter. And I always used to use them as an example of a team that doesn't finish well because they're ahead in the first half, third quarter, and then they lose in the fourth. I have to change it now because this season they're winning their games.
Well, here we are in the middle of January. We don't know what the outcome was because this was recorded earlier, but let's hope maybe the Vikings finish very well. Who knows, huh?
Well, this past game with the Colts a month or so ago, they finished strong and finished well in the fourth quarter. But Bob Buford wrote the book Second Half, and he said in that book, the second half of your life could be the most influential, the most satisfying, the most exciting season of your life. And I'm thinking that too, how we live in our fourth quarter, the influence that we have. And I'm thinking not just professional or career or relationship, but kids and grandkids.
Right.
I've got 9 grandkids, and I want to be an influence to those 9 kids to show them what it is to walk with the Lord, to encourage them in their walk, to be a model for them, because we as grandparents can have an influence on our grandchildren, the millennials that are struggling right now with faith matters.
We're learning from the life and experience of Wayne Pederson on this edition of First Person, and we'll continue in a moment. Here's Ed Cannon on the vision for FEBC's weekly podcast.
The primary purpose of Until All Have Heard, of course, is to share the experience that FEBC has because we have staff on the ground in so many oppressive places. But in addition to that, we're trying to speak to you in a way that only the kind of testimonies you'll hear from around the globe can do.
Discover how the gospel is making a difference around the world. Search for Until All Have Heard on your favorite podcast platform, or hear it online at febc.org. My guest is longtime friend Wayne Pederson. Many of you know that name because you've heard Wayne on the radio all these years, or have served under his leadership in any one of a number of organizations, or been a donor to one of those organizations, and you know his leadership capabilities. But we're just talking today about this season of life. Finish strong, finish well, I guess would be our theme, just as I'm going to take that from you, Wayne. So if you don't mind, we'll borrow it today.
Sure. And the thing is that, yes, we have our ups and downs. We've all had them. There's times in our careers where things are not going well and not according to plan, and it's not pleasant. And then there are the good times where it's prosperous, and learning to trust God in the good times and the hard times is a part of finishing well. Paul says, forgetting what lies behind. And he had a lot of stuff happening in his life that he didn't want to focus on, but pressing on towards what's ahead.
Yes, exactly. And you have had some ups and downs, both personally and professionally. I mean, you've survived cancer a couple of times. Your wife, Norma, passed away from cancer. We all loved Norma so much. A few years ago, she was promoted to heaven. So that was certainly a difficult time in your life. But there have been times of great joy as well, I'm sure.
Well, and we learn to trust God when we hit rock bottom, or we find out where our faith foundation is. Yeah. And whether it was, I had a major career disappointment, and it was very hurtful and very hard, but it brings you back to your roots. Do I really trust God or not? And when Norma was diagnosed with cancer and eventually promoted to heaven, like C.S. Lewis asked the question, do we really believe what we say we believe? And if we believe what we teach on the radio or from pulpits, that this life is a short time compared to the glory of heaven, if we really believe that, then that changes our perspective. And I say for Norma, being with Jesus is much better than being with Wayne, I can guarantee you. And we would not bring her back to this broken world. Mm. And then even recently, when I had a diagnosis of very serious and rare form of cancer.
Yeah, we were all praying for you earnestly.
And we felt those prayers. Oh, the circles we run in, Wayne, the advantage is, we have hundreds of prayer partners with us.
Yeah.
But at that time, I could have died because it was that serious. And I had to say, God, whether I live, I want you to be glorified. If I promoted to heaven, I want you to be glorified. But I do want to live. I have much more to live for. Mm-hmm. And by God's gracious mercy, through some excellent medical help and through his divine healing, when I did go through the surgery and the procedure, there was found no spread of the cancer. Hmm. And the pathology report said, you won't be back. This will not return. So attribute that to a God who hears and answers our prayers. He's a wonder-working God. And I believe, I respect the good medical care I received at ND Anderson, but I am grateful for God's healing role in all of this.
Yeah, it was dramatic, and we're so grateful to God for sparing you to be with us a little while longer, Wayne.
Thanks.
And, another major life event for you was finding Willie and remarrying, and she's a very important part of your life now as well.
Well, God is a God of a second chance, and need to hear her story sometime. She was a beautiful young lady that was on TV. She was a flight attendant. She was a dental hygienist, but wandered far from God and went through a very hard time wandering from God and made some bad choices and was gloriously saved in Aspen, Colorado, where she moved to be a dental hygienist. And John Denver was one of her clients. So, she had that kind of a life. But when she surrendered her life to the Lord, was really born again, she became just on fire for God. Moved to Colorado Springs, and she was on a missions trip from her church to build a clinic in Ghana. And HCJB at the time, Reach Beyond, was building a clinic, and a work team came in. That's where we met. So Norma and I knew Willie from way back, never, ever imagining we'd be married someday. And shortly after Norma passed away, we reconnected as friends, and we knew fairly soon, in your late 60s, you kind of know. And we knew right away that this was something special. So God has given me this wonderful, delightful, fun partner for this season of life as well. I'm very, very grateful to have that companionship and encouragement.
Let's go back to the life cycle of a career. For the person who's at the worker stage now and wants something more, would like to be in management and leadership and have influence in other people's lives, it doesn't seem to be happening for them. Talk to that person who's listening.
Well, number one, focus on what you've been given to do. And as it went in radio, and I know with you, Wayne, and with me, I started out working weekends, 6 a.m. to 3 p.m., Saturdays and Sundays. And I was the only one at the radio station running the whole thing and just grinding it out and showing up every weekday morning at 5 a.m.
Ironic, isn't it, that it was so lonely in those hours, and yet there were so many people listening?
I can't believe how they trusted this 20-year-old with all of that. But to whom, here's the thing, that when you serve faithfully and effectively, you're given more responsibility. And gradually, Paul Ramsey, my boss at the time, many of our listeners know him, asked me to do this and that and took over some of his programs. And that's how I grew professionally. And when he was promoted, he promoted me behind him as station manager. So I think, faithful in little, you'll be given much. That's a spiritual principle from our Lord himself. And so I would say, I was in radio 13 years before I became manager of the station, 13 years. And I wasn't impatient, but by that time I was looking to do something more. So if you're 25 years old and wondering, just do what you're called to do, be faithful, be joyful, but be open to where God is going to lead. And God has, in our lives, Wayne, opened some unbelievable doors we could not have ever sought out ourselves. When we leave the choice to God, he gives his best to us. So be patient and be faithful and expectant and prayerful, and see what God does with you.
Excellent. Let's take a look at 2 Timothy 4. This was another passage that you used in that message in your own church that moved me to get in touch with you about this interview. 2 Timothy 4, verses 7 and 8. Do you have that one in front of you?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite. And again, this is Paul at the very end of his life. He was expecting to be executed by Nero. He was in a prison in Rome, writing to his son, spiritual son, Timothy. And he says, I have fought the good fight, and I have finished the race, and I have remained faithful. Those are three great statements. Fought the fight, finished the race, remained faithful. And now a prize awaits me, the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give to me on the day of his return. And for our listeners, this prize is not just for me, but to all who eagerly look forward to his appearing. Just reading this morning in my private devotions about not to become so embroiled in this life, we lose the aspect of eternity, because what we're doing here, with all its ups and downs, the joys and the sorrows, is nothing compared to the glory that will be revealed. So again, to be faithful to the Lord in the good times and the bad times, whatever happened, to look forward that there will be a reward, a time when Jesus comes back again and brings us into glory.
What a helpful conversation, Wayne. Thank you so much. We're not done yet, though, because I want to ask you, looking back over this long career and ministry that God has given to you, if you could go back and relive any portion of it, what would be the one time that you say, I'd like to go back and have another crack at that?
For all the opportunities I've had to serve and to lead, well, it's hard to say, Wayne, but I think the happiest times when I was on the air every day, just on the air, talking to our listeners every day. I did the afternoon drive time 3 to 6. I did the daily book reading type of a thing. And that was a joyous time. And that was really my sweet spot. We were spinning our LPs, and you'd rip the news off the wire and read the weather and, answer the phone and do all of that.
Didn't you love queuing up records, real records?
Yeah. Remember those? Yes. But obviously, in our lives, God has something more for us than we could not have imagined. And when we're called upon to lead or take a position of responsibility, we have to leave even some of the things that we love doing behind because of our calling. And that's really what it comes down to, Wayne. We use the word career a lot here today, but it's really a calling. What is God calling you to do? And that's what gets you through the tough times. Is this a job or is it a calling? For me, it was a calling.
And there's no doubt that by answering that call, Wayne Pederson has made a difference for God's kingdom. He's recently told more of his story by writing a memoir titled The Journey, and you'll find a link at firstpersoninterview.com. These programs are for the purpose of telling the stories of people who have given their lives in service of Jesus Christ, who has made all the difference in their life. You can go back through our online archive and listen to these individual stories at firstpersoninterview.com. Our partner in bringing you First Person each week is the Far East Broadcasting Company. Both Wayne Pederson and myself are heavily involved in this ministry and would love for you to become better acquainted with it by going to FEBC.org. There you'll learn more about this radio service that broadcasts in local languages around the world, proclaiming the gospel message. There's also a podcast at FEBC.org. Now, with thanks to my friend and producer Joe Carlson, I'm Wayne Shepherd. Thanks for listening to First Person.